All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. We do educational videos, and we try to inform you on great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, cosmologies, but also earth-shattering discoveries and magnum opuses and tour de forces, anything that might really blow your mind, red pill you, help you out with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, and your quest for better spiritual, mental, physical, and spiritual health. I said spiritual twice. We've done several hundred videos on both the ancient Egyptian tree of life and also the reciprocal system of Dewey B. Larson, the greatest modern theory of everything out there, who unifies science, all the sciences, all the major fields of science, as well as science and religion. And so we're getting to the religion aspect here. This is our 261st video on the unit that we call the Reciprocal Church, named after the reciprocal system of theory. And we try to look at different authors or presenters who really put in a lot of time digging out something without ever getting acknowledged or paid or anything even recognized at all. And but they still did a great job with what they did. Maybe they didn't hit a home run, but they definitely got on base, and they or something to build off of. And that's really what the name of the game is. I would say syncretism, putting together a spiritual practice for yourself that, resonates with you. You don't have to be assigned to a religion. You can create one for yourself using various prosaic, even, different sources. We've looked at some ecstatic music, deep meditation to evoke exotic mental states of consciousness. And we're going to be looking at some sacred geometry and sacred arithmetic, sacred languages, and music theory, and extreme exertion to bring out that second wind, or that peace inside the pain, put us into the zone, that effortless effort, evoking, I guess, some Taoism. And today we're looking again at kind of the reason that we feel like it's necessary to put together your own spiritual practice, because the religions that you grew up with are now null and void. They are maybe still appear to be valid, but when a lot of the new information actually gets exposed to people, they will recognize that all our major religions in the West, and I would say I count among those to be Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Satanism, and also atheism, which I would just call scientism. All of those things are things that you cannot believe in. There are things that are fake for different reasons and to different degrees. We're focusing on Christianity and the New Testament right now. We're looking at a book from Michael Menescot's called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And the Flavians were a dynasty of three emperors, three Roman emperors that ruled from 69 to 96 AD, called the Flavians. That means blonde or golden. And that includes Emperor Vespasian, his two sons, Titus his oldest, and Domitian. And they were the Roman emperors who wrote the New Testament. And I think it's almost unassailable that they did, especially when you read the works of Josephus. Christians use the work of Josephus to corroborate the existence of Jesus. Josephus is the only author from the first century, other than the New Testament, to mention the existence of Jesus in passing in one of his books called Wars of the Jews that came out in about 75 AD. He also puts a paragraph in on him in his later 20-volume work called Antiquities of the Jews that came out in about 93 AD. And obviously much after the fact. He did not live through the events. He was not an eyewitness, but nonetheless, Christians give him a great deal of credit, and to the point where many Christian sects had Josephus as part of their Bible at one point, and to this day, the preterists still do. Josephus is part of the canon. Now, don't know how they can justify that when they read Josephus's autobiography. He says what happened. He was a Jewish general. He wasn't really strongly believing in the war. There was a war between the Jews and the Romans starting in 66 AD, although it had been brewing up to that for over 100 years before that. There were constant revolts, revolutions, insurrections, and just in general bad feeling between the Romans and the Jews. The Romans were very tired of the Jews, their separatism, their monotheism, their rituals, including their kosher food, restrictions, as well as their restrictions against graven images and against for circumcision and many other and just the zealousness of the Jews that they were actually willing to die for not bowing down to the Romans. The Romans had conquered hundreds of different people, and they pretty much got all of them to assimilate except for the Jews. And so that was the motive for the Jews, for the Romans to write the Gospels. They wanted to present a Jewish hero and even a Messiah, Savior, who believed in turning the other cheek and in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, who was a Prince of Peace, who wanted to walk an extra mile with the Romans' backpack on his back, and to recognize that the Roman slave owner had the greatest faith in all of Judea. So that's what happened. And if you read Josephus, what he says happened is that he was fighting as a general for the Jews against the Romans, but he was captured by Emperor Vespasian, who was at that time just the general. And at that point, Josephus had somewhat of an epiphany, telling him that God now favors the Romans and not the Jews. And so he defected to the Romans. And he predicted or prophesied that one day Vespasian would become emperor. And when Vespasian did become emperor, he went and he pardoned Josephus, brought him to Rome as one of the court historians, and adopted him into his family. So now we know of him as Flavius Josephus. And if you read the 7 books of Josephus's Wars of the Jews, which again came out about 73 to 75 AD, you get kind of a deja vu like feeling, because there are so many parallels between Wars of the Jews and the Gospels. And so this author, Michael Menescotz, Menasgotz, in his book, he basically puts just one book of the New Testament, of the Gospels, Luke, which has 24 chapters, puts Luke on the vertical axis. He puts Wars of the Jews on the horizontal axis, 694 paragraphs of it. And whenever he finds a parallel between the two, he puts a dot there, plots the point. And he found over 250 points to plot. Just in the 24 chapters of the book of Luke, there are over 250 parallels. Some of them are extremely powerful and devastating. Some of them are somewhat, you can explain them away. But I just don't think you can explain all of them away. You could probably explain, a good chunk of them away because they're not that strong. But some of them are, like I said, devastating. And so we're going over them kind of one at a time here in this book, along with the various themes. So like one major theme is that now what they did is they wrote the Gospels and they backdated them by 40 years. So what Jesus is doing it in the 30s, in the early 30s AD. What Titus, Vespasian's son, when Vespasian became emperor in 69 AD, his son Titus became the new general. And so we're looking at Titus is from 70 to 73 AD. So they backdated it by 40 years. And many of the things that Jesus prophesies in the New Testament in a symbolic way or in a parable, these things are fulfilled literally by Titus in Wars of the Jews. What that means is basically that the second coming of Jesus is Titus. Not some character that we're waiting for right now out of the book of Revelation. No, it already happened 1,950 years ago with Titus. That was the second coming of Jesus. And again, Josephus was writing as a historian, and he's seen as being one of the great historians of all time. So, we have to give him some credit for being accurate. I don't have to, but the scholars are supposed to, So when Jesus predicts something that's fulfilled by Titus, it's hard to discount that part about Titus because that's supposed to be history. Anyway, what's also interesting in those parallels is that the place where Jesus makes the prediction is exactly the same place where Titus fulfills the prediction. And at the time when Jesus makes the prediction is exactly 40 years to the day in some cases, offset by when Titus fulfills the prediction. Now, that's just one of the patterns. There are several other patterns, and sometimes Jesus predicts things that are fulfilled by other characters in Wars of the Jews, and there are some variations from that, but that makes up a good chunk of or at least, a significant amount of these different parallels. So now we're going to look at this section, which is called Zacharias as a pun on A to Z of the gods. Menescotz is not the first person to come up with this Roman origins hypothesis. I can name at least 8 or 9 others. In this century, Joseph Atwill, in his book Caesar's Messiah, Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, and also Henry Davis, Creating Christianity. Roman Piso has written several books, many of them lost, but he's got online a few books, including Piso Christ. He believes that Josephus was just a pen name of Arius Piso, one of his distant relatives, who was of the powerful Piso family, who are actually known as the Little Caesars. The problem is that Arius Piso doesn't really appear in the historical record. So people don't really think he existed, but he kind of reconstructs the existence of Arius Piso through the letters that he is writing to, the letters that are written to people like Pliny the Younger and also Tacitus, who were two of the other scholars from the 2nd century, secular scholars who mentioned the name of Jesus. But again, it's discounted because they're both in the royal family of the Romans. So, you know, that if you have the Roman hypothesis, that's very easily explained. Same with Emperor Trajan and Suetonius, who eventually became Emperor Antoninus Pius. Those two were also, so that is really all 5 of the ancient secular scholars who had mentioned the name of Jesus. They were all insiders to the Roman royal family, and 2 or 3 of them had become emperor. But anyway, Arius Piso was also fingered much earlier by Abelard Reuchlin in his book, 1979 booklet called The True Authorship of the New Testament. He also determined that a character named Arius Piso wrote the Gospels, even though this character Arius Piso does not appear in like the historical record. And he also posits, one of them, if not both of them, posit that Arius Piso is also like an A to Z kind of character, because his name Arius is A, and then it ends with O or omega, alpha to omega, or A to Z. So what the final thing that I didn't point out is that when Menescot's plotted those 250 points of correspondence between the 2 books, they make a pattern. It's not just randomness. They make a pattern, 5 Latin letters, A, P, T, V, S, which I think stands for Arius, Piso, Titus, Vespasian, and S, or Vespasianus. There are Roman coins that say TVS on them. And so then you put the Arius Piso in front of it, and they literally signed their name to the book of Luke. So we'll get into Menescot's right now. Zacharias as a pun on A to Z of the gods. Now remember, Zechariah was the father of John the Baptist, if I'm not mistaken about that. Some of these many-to-one parallels involve the character Zacharias, and the hidden message relating to him is amazing. The name crops up in both stories, and both in English and the original Greek, the word Zacharias contains Arius, pointing to Ares, the war god Mars, or perhaps Arius. Like, these Romans, you have to know that they were super into like word games, punning, codes, deciphering, and they were also into pseudonyms. They all used aliases. They all had like 5 names to start with. This was their ancestor worship. They took the names of their famous ancestors, and so they all had a multitude of names already. And then they permutated their names. So that would exactly be what Arius Piso would do. Take off the R, or change the I to an E, or, you know, just kind of permutate the letters just kind of one at a time. And so that was kind of like their trademark. Because, again, the royals were the only people that were writing at this time. They were the only people that were publishing at this time, and they were the only people who were disseminating their work at this time. So the idea that a bunch of people from Palestine or from Judea are going to be writing this and getting it out to the public so fast by the thousands of copies is not realistic. And it even sounds more ridiculous when you recognize that the New Testament was originally written in Greek. You know, there's not anybody in Palestine who knows how to even understand Greek, much less read it. Only really the elite among the Jews understood Greek, where it was massively understood in Rome. So that's the first thing that we have to get clear, is that the Gospels emanated from Rome, not from Judea. And that should tell you something. So, okay, so now we're here at paragraph. I'll start by introducing some parallels involving Zacharias before how interesting his character is in the next section. Okay, this is Jewish War, paragraph 509, book 4, chapter 9, paragraph 2. Vespasian was to march to Jerusalem, but heard of Nero's death, which was on the 9th of June, 68 AD. And that brought on the year of the four emperors. Nero was assassinated by Arius Piso, quite likely. And then in came Galba, who was assassinated shortly thereafter, Otho, who was assassinated shortly thereafter, and Vitellius, who was assassinated shortly thereafter. Finally, they brought in Vespasian in 69 AD. So 4 emperors assassinated in 12 months, or maybe 18 months. I'm not sure exactly, but in a very, very short period. I'd be like, no, thank you. I'll just stay here over as the general. It's safer here at war against the Jews than it is in the court of the emperor at Rome. But anyway, so Vespasian started waiting in 68 AD because he was waiting because he thought his name might be called as the new emperor. I don't know exactly how these things work, but so he stood waiting for news. Hearing Galba was throned, he still did nothing, awaiting orders, meaning Vespasian tarried or waited from July 68 onwards, after he found out Galba was given the call, was throned. Vespasian did not go to talk to Galba, but sent Titus, his son, to salute him. So he's like, Titus, go to Rome and say, we support this. When Galba died, which was in 69 AD, January 69, Titus, by a divine impulse, returned to Vespasian. And they still did not attack Jerusalem whilst Rome was unsettled. Okay, so there's a Roman civil war going on over like who's going to be the new emperor. And there's a couple different factions involved. Kind of the Nero faction and the anti-Nero faction. And they still did not attack Jerusalem whilst Rome was unsettled. And now he moves up to Jewish War 521. When Vitellius reigned, Vespasian restrained himself. Okay, so now he doesn't mention Otho, but Otho reigned and was murdered. Vitellius is now there. When Vitellius reigned, Vespasian restrained himself because it was winter. So he still tarried, or he still waited. And then a few paragraphs later, it says, finally he went to Rome via Egypt. So he departed to his own house in Rome. But he went to Egypt first. Now, how Luke parodies this using Zacharias. So again, this is a parody from Luke to Josephus. So, that's why you can't really say that, they just wrote Wars of the Jews later fit in with the what gospels which were already written, but they weren't. They were written around the same time, and they parody each other. So there's a conversation going on between them. So you know that whoever wrote Josephus also wrote the gospels. And we know Josephus was writing from Rome. So whoever was writing the gospels was writing from Rome. How Luke parodies this using Zacharias. Luke chapter 1, verse 13. The angel Gabriel told Zacharias that his wife would bear him a son. Okay, now I'm moving up to chapter 20, verse 20. But the angel told him he would be mute until these things take place. And the people waited for Zacharias and marveled that he tarried or waited so long in the temple. And when he came out, he could not speak. Okay, so Zacharias, the old man, just like Vespasian. Vespasian was like 60 years old at the time that he got promoted. Quietly waited 9 months until his son came to them. And they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned to them and remained speechless. And it happened that as soon as the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. Okay, now there's a parallel there, but it's not strong and it's not easy to see, and it's not really that much of a message. So let's see what he says. Luke offers no explanation for why Zacharias had to wait silently or why this is worthy of mention, bearing in mind how many far more important things get omitted, such as what language Jesus spoke, which would probably have been Aramaic. Again, so when we're reading the original of the Gospels in Greek, they are already a translation of what he spoke, if you even believe that, whole line of thinking. However, we can see that Zacharias' behavior acts as a parable of Vespasian's initial military movements in Judea. All right. Now he says, this section is called the extraordinary subtlety employed. The way both of these famously old men quietly wait 9 months until their sons come gives us an insight into how carefully some parallels are hidden. Jewish war doesn't even offer the relevant dates. Instead, expects the reader to know them. Okay, I've got to turn the page here, which is not always easy. But it gets even harder when you're pretty inept on the computer, and the computer doesn't really like you that much either. Okay, I think I got the right page here. Okay, to know them or look them up. Luke doesn't say how long Zacharias waited, and even Matthew offers a cryptic comment requiring the reader to realize this equals 9 months. But both of them, Titus and Jesus, or John the Baptist, he had to wait 9 months for his son. Zacharias or Vespasian had to wait 9 months for his son. As a result, it took me over 2 years from seeing that there was a clear parallel there to finally noticing that both stories involved the old man spending 9 months waiting until his son came. How many other parallels are there with such cryptic details that I didn't notice? How many parallels are there that are lost in translation? I am in absolutely no doubt that there are many more to find, and it will fall to much cleverer people to find them. Well, my question is, what is that going to do with your chart that has the APTVS pattern on it? Are they all going to fit into that same chart? I mean, that's just the book of Luke. I certainly ask, what does the book of Mark look like? What does the book of Matthew look like? How do you, are there messages concealed in those books too? So anyway, that's something that I'd like to try to dig out, which I might be doing some of that, although I don't really speak any of these or write any of these languages. So what does Zacharias represent? We might be tempted to suspect that Zacharias is simply a parody of the human emperor Vespasian. However, Zacharias in Luke has a son who is going to also be called Zacharias, but instead got called John, and who represents the Romans' enemy, John. So in this war against the Jews, one of the Jewish leaders is named John. John from Gioris, I believe. Oh, no, that's Simon. It's John. Can't remember his last name, but he's one of the zealot leaders of the zealots. So it's a bit more complicated. As I will demonstrate later, Ares, or particularly Arius, which is the Latinization of the Greek word for Ares, the god of war, is a name that is hinted at repeatedly in the Gospels and appears to be what the A in APTVS stands for. But also notice the letters Z and A, the first and last letters in Latin. Revelation makes much ado about I am the first to the last, the Alpha and the Omega, even though O isn't the last letter of any language Jesus could be expected to have spoken. If this is seen from a Latinized perspective, the equivalent would be I am the first to the last, the A to the Z. And if Arius is a phonetic reference to the war god Ares, then Zacharias, and for that matter also the character Lazarus, who Jesus resurrected, might well be puns on this concept of Jesus representing, or the Flavians being, an A to Z of war gods. It would be a way of saying that they embody the power of all gods, which in turn provides a second explanation for why Jesus' story evokes multiple pre-existing divinity myths. The first being that the cult needed to attract diverse people of various beliefs, so making sure everyone would see their favored god reflected strongly in Jesus' story would be sensible. This Ares is not only what the A in APTVS stands for, but is also the first half of the AP character, which we find in the Gospels as Agia Pneuma, or Holy Spirit.